This is called the backstory of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it goes a little bit beyond that, right? So we're going to talk about the backstory of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then how some other pieces of scripture we found and some other evidences in the Judean desert that helps us understand the story of the Bible. Oh, that's right. I forgot this was here. This edition of the presentation, I did it at college, so I kind of had it laid out a little differently. But we're going to talk about recognize that God's creation declares His word. He also protects His word for our use in study. Gain a better understanding of the quality and the quantity of the early manuscripts and inscriptions. Recognize why the Apocrypha books were excluded from the canon of Scripture. Better understand when the canon of the books of the Bible actually took place. Okay? So, we can't talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls without understanding what came first. I think I am in the wrong presentation here. I'm sorry. Stand by. Technical difficulties. So, we're going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can't talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls without talking about the Cairo-Geniza first. So, setting the stage for the conversation, in the late 1800s, or leading up to the late 1800s, they called that the Age of Enlightenment. And people were getting so smart in their sciences and studies and so forth, they got very arrogant, and they started thinking, well, you know, the Bible's just superstitions. We're so smart now, we don't need God anymore. We have science is what we need and what we have. And so they started casting a lot of doubts on the scriptures, and they said, well, how do we know the scriptures are even real, that they're what God intended people to have? Because the manuscripts that the reformers had over here, Martin Luther and William Tyndale and so forth, were only a couple of hundred years old, the ones they were working from. So God gave us this discovery at the Cairo-Geniza. A Geniza is a storeroom for scrolls, okay? So the scrolls are used in the synagogues for hundreds of years, but they're constantly maintained and they're cared for. And if you think about when you write with a pen on paper, the ink stays on the paper, right? When you write with ink on the skins, it doesn't penetrate, it just sits on the surface. So when you roll and unroll the scrolls over all those years, all those generations, the ink can flake off over time. Sometimes as the humidity changes, the skins can shift and move a little bit and the letters get a little distorted. They can't be read that way, they have to be corrected. So a scribe has to come and constantly maintain the scrolls. Sometimes, and I can show you on a scroll over here, one of the panels of the scroll, one of the pieces of the skins was damaged so badly that it had to be replaced. And we can talk about that in a little while. But when the scrolls just can't be used anymore, they retire them. They're God's word. You can't just throw it away, right? You're not going to burn it. So what are you going to do? You're going to put it in a storage place forevermore, right? So that's what a Geniza is. This was a storeroom at a synagogue in Cairo, and they put all the old scrolls in there, and that's where they would go. But when it was discovered, they found, and by discovered, I don't mean that it was lost, but when the outside world realized what was there, they found somewhere between 300 and 400,000 scrolls and fragments of scrolls in there. Most of that huge number is fragments, just to be clear, but you can see the piles and piles of scrolls and fragments. Here on the table, the very first one over here, the small fragment piece that's dark skin, that's on antelope skin. That's from the 12th century. So that's about 800 years old or so. That was found in the Cairo Geniza. What that did for us was those scrolls predated anything else we had by about 600 years. So when we were able to compare these scrolls to what the reformers had, we found consistency. They read like what the translations came from. That was big news for people that believe in the scriptures, right? Skeptics said, well, yeah, what about before that? How do we know the scriptures didn't change before that? We get to Khirbet Qumran. This is just above the Dead Sea. If you swing the camera around 180 degrees, you're looking over the Dead Sea there. I guess a little bit more than 180 degrees, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. In these caves is where they found scrolls. But we're going to start the story with this guy, Moses Shapira. This is about a little bit before the Cairo Geniza was discovered. This guy, Moses Shapira, he was Jewish, and he went to Israel on business. And while he was there, he went to an antiquities shop, and he saw these strips of leather, and they had writing on them that he didn't recognize, but he thought they were old, and he had hoped to better identify them. So he took them back to Europe with him, and he showed them to people, and people said, oh, those can't be real. We don't recognize those letters. Why did you make these forgeries? What are you trying to pull here? And so it went from him being very proud of finding these pieces that he thought were super historical, he didn't understand what they were, to people were very hard on him and saying that he was trying to perpetrate a fraud, that these were forgeries, and it just devastated him. And it ruined his reputation in the business community, and he was so distraught that he ended up taking his own life over this. And the scrolls, the fragments of scrolls, let me scoot forward here. This is one of the only pictures that exist of the scroll fragments. They were sold at an auction for pennies, and then they disappeared. And nobody knows what happened to them. When you fast forward to today and we look at those, that seems to be the first discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the first pieces that were found. Oh, that was the other thing. This is from Deuteronomy. And it's interesting because it's written from a first-person perspective, right? That it's Yahweh speaking to his people directly. So it translates to, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. I am God, your God. So it was just a little bit of a turn of phrase on that made it in the first person. Let's go a little bit further. These are the two, they're not young men here, but at the time that they discovered the scrolls, they were just young guys. And they were looking for a lost goat. And the goat was lost in the desert. They were out looking for it. And this is the area that they're looking for the goat. Very rugged, as you can see. That's cave one up there. And the story goes that they were throwing rocks into the caves to try to stir the goat up that may have been hiding in the shade, right? But having been a young guy myself, I think it was more throwing rocks to throw rocks, and anything that didn't move, throw a rock at it, right? And so there was a cave opening, and you can almost hear the conversation of, I bet I can throw a rock in that cave opening before you can. And so they threw a rock up there, and it went in the cave, and they heard what sounded like breaking glass, breaking pottery, and they went in and found, that's a close-up of the cave there, and they found these jars, and in the jars were scrolls. Let's see here. Catch up on my notes a little bit. They initially found 3 scrolls. And they took them back to their camp. Yes?
POV, you hear clapping and realize you just broke ancient pots.
Yeah, right? Yeah, they weren't really thinking about that. They didn't know what they'd found yet, right? They thought it was interesting, but they're Arabs. They don't read Hebrew, so they're like, oh, what are these old things, you know? And they took them back to their camp, and apparently they had them at the camp for some time. Some of the narratives say that they were at the camp for quite a long time. Others say that it was fairly quick. I kind of go with the first one. I think they probably had them for a while. They say that they took one of the scrolls, they think it was the Isaiah scroll, and nailed it to the tent post outside of the tent as kind of a talisman, a good luck charm, right? And there it hung for a while, and then they eventually took it down, and their chief told them to take them into Bethlehem and meet with a broker, an antiquities broker named Kondo. When the boys, okay, so there's going to be about 5 names here. You got to kind of track with me because the stories break apart, okay? There was lots of characters in this story, but I kind of boiled it down to the 5 main characters we got to keep track of, okay? So, Kondo is an antiquities broker. The boys bring him 3 scrolls, and they try to sell them. And Kondo says, well, I don't want to buy them because I don't know what they are yet. Let's try to get them identified. While they're having this conversation, a man named George comes in. George and Kondo and a couple of the other characters that are coming up are all Syrian Christians, okay? George overhears this conversation, sees the scrolls, and it's leading into Easter time in 1947. And so George goes up to Jerusalem to the Syrian church there. And while they're doing their services and things, there is a bishop there named Samuel. George mentions to Samuel, hey, I saw these scrolls that were going to be for sale. They don't know what they are yet. I bet you could get them pretty cheap if you could get them before they're identified. So George is kind of pushing that. Samuel thinks, yes, I want to do that. Samuel is Archbishop Samuel, and he wants to raise money to get refugees out of Syria. So he sees this as a chance to buy something cheap, resell it for money, and get more refugees out of Syria. While this is happening, Kondo tells the boys, why don't you go back to those caves and see if you can find anything else? The boys go out looking in the caves. Archbishop Samuel meets with Kondo and buys the 3 scrolls, brings them back to the church. He doesn't know what he has. So he starts contacting the American universities and Hebrew universities trying to get these things identified. There is a man at Hebrew University called Sukenik, and Kondo called him, and now this archbishop is calling him to identify these scrolls. So he's trying to get a chance to look at the scrolls to see what they are. Are you tracking with me so far? Yeah? Okay. I'm trying not to jump around too much. Kondo said, the boys come back with 4 more scrolls. Kondo says, hey, the archbishop said if any more scrolls come in, take them up to the church up in Jerusalem, and he'll buy them. Okay, so the boys take the scrolls and they go up to the church at Jerusalem, and they knock on the door, and a monk answers the door, and the 2 boys say, we're here to see the bishop, Bishop Samuel. He said he wants to buy these scrolls. Well, this is in Jerusalem. Everybody barters and trades all the time, right? And so the monk says, what are these kids trying to pull? I'm not wasting the bishop's time with this nonsense. And he shuts the door in their face, chases them away. Well, unfortunately for him, that was the last chance he was going to have to get these scrolls. They're going a different direction now. Sukenek and Kondo are talking about the 4 scrolls. And Sukenek says, I need to see something. So they make an appointment to meet at the fence, at the barbed wire fence that's dividing Jerusalem at this time, right? And so through the coils of barbed wire, with Kondo on one side and Sukenek on the other, they're looking at the scrolls through the fence, trying to show it to him. And Sukenek says something effective, I really can't see it well. Can you pass it through the wire? And so Kondo, there's a piece that's loose and he tears it off and passes it through the fence so Sukenek can have it. And he says, okay, I'm going to take this home and I'm going to study it and I'll get back with you. Meanwhile, Jerusalem is getting very tense. There's lots of sporadic shooting. Things are getting to a boiling point. Samuel knows that he's got to leave the city soon. One of his monks is walking through the courtyard of the church and gets shot by a random bullet flying through the air and hits him and kills him. And Samuel says, okay, it's time for me to go. So he packs his bag and he puts the 3 scrolls in a bag and he walks out of the city and starts on foot heading towards Syria. He gets the ride and so forth. He's off to Syria. When he gets to Syria, he goes to the Syrian Christian church and he's trying to contact oh boy, I'm sorry, I missed a step here. Please forgive me. Before Samuel leaves the church, he contacted the American University. He was trying to get a hold of Dr. Albright. Dr. Albright was in America already. And so they send over a couple of graduate students, and they're going to take pictures of the scrolls, and so Dr. Albright can identify them. And as they're rolling the scroll out inside of the building, the power goes out. So they end up taking the tables outside in the courtyard and roll the scrolls out in the courtyard on the tables and taking pictures of them. They package the film and send it off. Shortly after that's when the monk is killed and Samuel heads out. But they have the pictures and they send them off to America. This is 1947, so it takes a lot of time to get those rolls of film all the way across the Atlantic back to America. When Samuel gets to, did you have a question or are you just stretching? Okay. When Samuel gets to Syria, he tries to contact another American university there to have them look at it. Everybody's out on digs or home on leave. He has nobody to look at it. So in frustration, he boards a ship and sails for America with the scrolls. Meanwhile, back in Israel, Sukenek has the fragment of the scroll and he's looking it over, and it is Saturday night after sunset. He's back in his office, and as he's going over this literally with a magnifying glass, he recognizes one of the letters, one of the characters, and he had seen it on a ossuary, a bones box like this one. But from about 200 to 300 BC, he sees that same letter, and he says, oh my gosh, this is the real thing. This is very early Hebrew. And so he's excited, but it's Saturday evening. And now for the Christians, the Sunday Christians, their Sabbath has already started, and he doesn't want to bother Kondo on his Sabbath, right? So he lets it sit. While he's contemplating this discovery, his son comes in. This is November 29th. His son bursts in and says, the UN has voted in favor of recognizing the Jewish state of Israel. So they're excited. Sukenek writes, he says, this great event in Jewish history was thus combined with another event no less historical, one political, the other cultural. And that kind of stuck out at me. It really says where he was at, that he viewed the discovery of these scrolls as a cultural event, not as a spiritual faith event, right? As all of this is happening, Albright has the pictures, they're finally developed, and he sees it and he says, oh my goodness, this is huge. And he sends a message back to the graduate students, trying to find Samuel, Archbishop Samuel, to tell him those are the real scrolls. Those are ancient scrolls of the scriptures. Sukenik missed the opportunity to buy the scrolls from Samuel, but he's able to buy the 4 scrolls from Kando and bring those into Hebrew University. The other scrolls are still out traveling the world. They're in America now. And Archbishop Samuel has gotten word that they're the real thing. So if you have these real scrolls and you want to sell them, I think this is interesting. What do you do? How do you find the market for these? Well, he's in New Jersey, so he runs an ad in the Wall Street Journal Classifieds that says, under miscellaneous, that says biblical manuscripts dating back at least 200 BC for sale. I think that's just funny. So he's contacted by several people, and the one that he meets with is an American businessman, he thinks, and they negotiate a price for the 3 scrolls of $250,000. This is 1954 now, when all of this is happening. So $250,000, 1954, that's a lot of money, and he's going to get a lot of refugees out of Syria. The person that bought them was Yigal Yadin, and he was the son of Professor Sukenik, the one that came in and told him that Israel was recognized by the UN. Unfortunately, Professor Sukenik had passed away about 3 months earlier, so he never saw all of the 7 scrolls back together in Israel at the university. Let's go forward here a little bit. Okay, so this guy here with the fez, that's Kando. And this guy here with his back to the camera is Sukenik. And I'm not sure who that is. It's part of the conversation there. Let's go another one here. This is a stage photograph again much later. This is the Archbishop Samuel there. And this is a guy named John Trevor. And John Trevor was one of the graduate students that really stuck with the scroll research program while they were identifying these pieces. All right, so Yigal Yadin is a military officer. He is an archaeologist, and he becomes very famous in politics as well. But he takes teams out and they start exploring the caves where the scrolls were found, trying to recover all of the scrolls that they can, all of the fragments that they can. And they end up, oops, I think I turned the page too soon here, let me just show you this real quick. 1,000 scrolls and about 15,000 fragments of scrolls. Okay, so the breakdown percentage of the scrolls, 40% of the scrolls are scripture, 30% of the scrolls are the Apocrypha books, and 30% of the scrolls, are sectarian documents. The sectarian documents are really interesting because they shed a lot of light on the rules and beliefs in the particular groups in Greater Judaism. These scrolls are all Second Temple period, so it helps a lot with understanding the politics that were happening in the temple, okay? Let's go another one here. Okay, take a look at these guys. They have a task in front of them, all those little pieces. Notice the cigarette here with the ash ready to fall off, the cigarette here with the ash ready to fall off as they're leaning over these things, trying to figure out what's going on. How do they piece these puzzles together? There was an interesting event that took place in this. So this guy here, Harding, he was the head of the Palestine Archaeological Museum on the east side of Jerusalem. And just before the War of Independence kicked off, the Jordanian government it was a political thing. They decided, why do we have Americans here or foreigners here doing all this research on these scroll fragments and so forth? We should have our people doing that. And things are getting ready to boil up in Jerusalem again. We ought to get those scrolls out and bring them back to Aqaba, right? They let Harding go and his team, but before they have the opportunity to take the scrolls away, the War of Independence takes place, and the Israelis take over that side of Jerusalem and are able to acquire the Palestine Archaeological Museum, and then it becomes the Rockefeller Museum. And that's where the scrolls and things were all held. Let's go a little further. So what you see here is these are pieces of glass with the fragments sandwiched between the pieces of glass, like this papyrus fragment is over here, okay? And that helps protect them, but you can examine them. But this is at Hebrew University now. Look at the windows here, these big tall windows, all that natural light coming in. It's wonderful to be able to see, but it's not good for the scrolls, right? All these scroll fragments, all that. And then you notice down here, look at the curtain is kind of blowing out. They've got the windows open. There's no air conditioning. You got to let the fresh air in, so you have all the air blowing around and drying these little pieces out. They were doing the best they could in the environment they were in. They're near prepared to take on this challenge. Just took over classroom areas and put these tables together with all these fragments and so forth. There was so much going on in Israel at this time, they were not terribly concerned. Well, whether they were concerned or not, they didn't have very good security on this project. There was a lot of other things going on. So initially the doors weren't even locked where the scrolls and fragments of scrolls were. And then when they locked the doors, they were still keyed in a way that so many people had keys to them and could get in and out. And they know at least several scrolls disappeared, and who knows about fragments. Let's move on again. My friend Rusty Maisel was a phenomenal photographer, and when he went to Israel, he was able to work with a friend of his that had been on the Dead Sea Scrolls project for about 30 years at this time. This is 1994 when this was taken. They were working on this scroll. Rusty took that picture of it. They weren't able to identify what the scroll said. It's very blackened, you can see. If you remember the jars that the scrolls were in, where am I at here? You can see these above me. You can see how this jar was all put back together, right? It was broken and they reassembled it. So if you think about the caves where these were at, what kind of critters live in caves? Maybe some flying critters, right? Bats. And the bats leave the caves and they go out and they eat all their bugs in the evenings, and they come back to the caves and they hang there, and maybe they knock some rocks loose from time to time, and the rocks fall and hit a jar, and the jar breaks, and now the scroll is exposed to that hot, dry air, and it starts to flake over the centuries. Meanwhile, the bats are still living there, and they're still doing what bats do, and they're pooping and peeing on all of this stuff, and all of this debris is falling down. So when they go into the caves and look for these pieces, they're not laying there on the ground. They're buried under layers of dirt and bat waste, right? And so they got to go through that very slowly to get these pieces out, and you end up with these pieces that are very blackened. At this time, the latest, greatest technology was infrared. They used infrared to light this, and look what they see. Now you can read it, right? On Torah scrolls, on scrolls, not just Torah scrolls, on scrolls, there's always a blank column, like right here, you can see this is blank. There's a blank column at the beginning of the scroll and at the end of the scroll. It's the only places where there's blank columns. So that tells us it's the beginning of the scroll. Up here, when you read this, this is the opening of Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This turned out to be the earliest Genesis that was found in that cave, in any of the caves. And I have a full-size picture of it back here I can set out if you guys are interested in seeing it. And I often set that with this scroll here, that's 16th to 17th century scroll. This one is from Western Europe, much newer, never been to Israel. That one had never left Israel. 2,000 years apart, about 1,000 miles apart, and you put them together and they read exactly with each other, letter for letter. It's just incredible. Let's go further. Okay, so I was curious when I started to do this. Oh, I didn't tell you the background on this. When I was asked to do this presentation the first time, I was at a museum in Texas, and they're all big brain guys. And there's like a bunch of retired physicists from NASA that are there, and all these kinds of guys, paleontologists, archaeologists, all this. And I'm just little old me, a historian, right? And the director asked me to give a presentation. And so I was going to talk about the Bible in English. 2 weeks before I go to do the presentation, he calls me, he says, you know what, I want you to do a presentation on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I said, oh my goodness, you got to be kidding me. Everybody knows this subject better than me. And so I was praying about it, and that's when God put it on my heart to do the backstory, to tell how we got to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I got to thinking about it. I thought, okay, what other scriptures and things have been found out there in the deserts around the Dead Sea? And we have found all kinds of text out there. These are a few of the areas where things have been found. Let's move again. This one is the Meribot scroll. I got to catch up on my notes here. See, I went too far ahead again. The Meribot scroll is of the Minor Prophets. There's 21 columns in this piece. This is called the Cave of Letters, and I thought this was really interesting. See the cave way up there, and then down here at the bottom, you see the guy standing there looking up, how far that is, right? And it's pretty much an equal distance above the cave. And so Yigal-Yadin had heard that someone had purchased a first century tunic, youth-size tunic. And so he's like, wait a minute, where's this coming from? Who's finding this stuff? Where are they finding it? So they went out looking, and intel told them they'd found it at this cave. So they're going to search this cave. Below the cave, below where this guy is standing on the flats, is the remains of a Roman camp. Above the cave, up on top up there, is another Roman camp. So they had the Romans had somebody trapped in here, right? Let's go. When they got in there, the cave had already been ransacked. Lots of things were missing and gone. You could see that people had been in there. But they found these handheld mirrors, buttons, thread, all kinds of interesting beads. They found a tunic there that was an adult tunic and a belt. And let me go to my notes here. In this cave, this is 25 miles south of Qumran. This was found in the 60s. I already told you about the Roman camps. So there was evidence of rebels having taken shelter or refuge in the cave, rebels from the Bar Kokhba revolt. They found coins in there that, where is that here? The revolt coinage to the freedom of Jerusalem is stamped on the coins, right? They found all kinds of things in there. They found skulls, they found skeletons. And so while they were being held captive in the cave by the Romans above and below, some of the people started dying that were in there. And they had rugs on the floor, and so they rolled the bodies up in the rugs and put them back in the cave. And so when this was discovered, there was these rugs rolled up back there with the human remains inside. There was a ledge that they had found, and when they kind of got up there, it dropped back behind where the ledge was, and in that bottom area there was a basket with a leather cover inside of the basket, and there was an infant in the basket. And then under the basket was a bunch of letters, and that's where this cave gets its name, the Cave of Letters. They found bronze vessels and incense shovels, but they'd all been damaged. In the letters, there was a bundle of letters tied together, and they call it the Babatha cache because the woman's name was Babatha, and she was a first century woman. In the letters, they found a deed to a palm grove. In her letters, and it details the water rights. The water rights are hers 6 days a week, and then someone else has water rights 1 day a week from the well that was there. And then in her letters, it describes that she had 3 other groves that were hers. Her first husband died, and when her husband died, his family took her son. And so she wanted to get her son back, and one of the letters was a petition to the local governor to have a hearing so she could get her son back. There was also a marriage decree that she had married a new guy, and the new guy had another wife. She was going to be the second wife in this relationship. And the new guy asked to borrow money from her, and he borrowed 300 silver denarii. Well, unfortunately for him, he passed away shortly after that. So she's also suing the other wife to get the 300 denarii back because she felt like she had it. To me, all of this tells us that we often think of first century women as not having standing in the culture. But from these letters and things, it really shows that women did have standing in the culture. She was able to take these cases forward. Let's look here a little bit further. That's the registration for the orchard. They found a copy of the 23rd Psalms in there. So there's the desert. When I was writing this, I was thinking about, this is where King David took refuge when he was hiding from Saul, right? King Saul, he went down here. And this is also where Yeshua went when he was being tempted by Hasatan here. And then you look across that, you can see all of those caves out there and those faces. And you just have to think about how many more things are out there that the Father will reveal to us when the day comes. Any questions?
You said that somebody was being tempted by somebody else. Do you mean Jesus was being tempted?
Yes, I called him Yeshua, Jesus, yes. Jesus was being tempted by the devil. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Any other? Yes, sir.
All right, so I know this is relatively new technology, but with AI able to scan a lot of these older documents, are you finding, or at least is the discussion starting to happen, that as they're finding these scripts that are maybe in pieces, that they're able to photograph it and start kind of putting it together, instead of the human being have to go and scan it, it take time to do that, where it's basically able to put it together fairly quickly?
You know, I hadn't thought about that. I bet that is taking place. Everywhere I turn, a friend of mine's a translator for Wycliffe Society, and he was talking about how AI is helping them, and it's so much faster now in developing a new language. And then the Bible, of course, in that language, it's happening so fast. Yeah. Just a second. Have any of you seen where the scrolls from the Herculaneum near Pompeii, that giant library that was there of all the scrolls, and they were all carbonized? They're still intact, but they're all carbon, right? That using digital scans and AI, they're starting to be able to unroll the scrolls digitally and read them. That's so cool. Okay, what's up?
Did they ever find the goat?
I don't know if they ever found the goat. Someone else asked me that. I don't know. Yes.
And not only can they unroll scrolls, they've actually, like, do you know what World Watch is? World Watch?
World Watch, no.
It's basically a kid-friendly, like, news
Okay.
in a Christian worldview, and showed how there were bits of a Bible folded and turned into a book cover for another book.
Yes. Yes, that was very common. One of the earliest Hebraic writings in a codex is a book, right, like you're saying, was found. It was being used as a cover for another book. And so they would take and they would, the skin materials that is used for the scrolls and things is very expensive. It was very valuable. So they would take a book that they didn't want anymore and they would scrape all the ink off of it and try to get it down to nothing and then use it for another purpose, right? And so you'll see that they use that for a book cover. I'm trying to think I think that was the Aleppo Codex. I think it's the one that I'm thinking of. And it was found as a cover for another volume of whatever. And it's hard to see because they would change the direction. So you see clear writing this way, but underneath this way was the original Hebrew writing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They digitally unfolded it so that they wouldn't damage the book.
Yeah.
So it was like a good way to show what they did and how they did it.
Yeah.
Before we had technology.
There is a library at a monastery in the desert, the Sinai desert, called St. Catherine's. And at St. Catherine's, one of the awesome discoveries there was they had a basket of what was essentially recycled skins to use for other stuff. So they would strip it down, they were all in this basket, and the monks could just grab it and use it for whatever. And when they started looking through that, they found a lot of very early writings that nobody knew existed. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So, how many of the full scrolls have been translated, or are they now just working on fragments that get down to the scrolls? And
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear you. Say it again.
of the full scrolls, how many of them have been translated, and are they now just working on fragments, or are they still working on like the full scrolls too?
Of the Dead Sea Scrolls? I'm sure they're through the scrolls, you know, the fragments. I don't know where they're at in the fragments. Boy, they got to be getting down to the end of that. As far as identifying what they are, you know, there's so much other studying that can be done with them that continues on. I have my grandsons travel with me a lot. And the older one, when he was about 12 or 13, we were talking about this, and he was trying to, you know, one of these pictures back here where it's, you know, those tables with all the fragments. He's like, well, how come they can't fit them together or whatever? And I was telling him, I said, you know, imagine a jigsaw puzzle that the kids have taken out in the mud and played with in the dirt and then tried to throw them in the wash machine to wash them so they wouldn't get in trouble. And then they lost about half of them. And now you have all these pieces, and a lot of them, whatever the picture of the writing was, is gone or so obscured you can't see it. You got to put this puzzle together with all those pieces missing. All the edges are so irregular now they don't fit together anymore. So you end up with like this, where it's how they position those, right? And yeah, it was quite a project. DNA helped them a lot when we started to understand DNA, and they could get the fragments for animal X all gathered together. Now we know that's one skin for that. Now we can put a puzzle together, you know, and so that helped a lot. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
How much money would the skulls be?
A lot.
Like 100?
Yeah, something like that. They're valuable in what they are more than the money. Oh, I'm sorry, you did have a question. I skipped over you.
Yeah. Have they found any English scrolls ever?
No, the scrolls weren't written in English, right? The early scrolls were written in the biblical languages. Do you remember what we said those were?
Latin.
No, Latin's the first translation.
Hieroglyphics.
No, that would be the Egyptian side of things.
I think they're
Hebrew,
Greek.
and Arabic.
Aramaic, yeah, Aramaic. Nice. That's right. So that's what the scrolls were in. Anything else?
What is that thing on the screen?
What is what?
He was asking what that was.
Oh, parts of a scroll, yeah. Okay, well, why don't we be done, and then you guys can look at stuff, and I can show you those pictures of the scroll you can compare, okay? Did you have a question?
How do you get money in the Bible? How do you start with that? How do you get money? There's no like bank or stuff where you get money.
How do you earn money in Bible times? Because there's no banks, is what he asked.
Well, there were bankers, right?
That's
and
So how do you get money?
you had to do work, you had to sell things, you had to grow crops, or you had to maybe make rugs or hunt animals. You did things that people wanted so you could make money. Yeah. All right, you guys. We'll break it up. Let me grab those pictures. Thank you.